Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I feel like I should check with my team to say, yeah, is everything good? Okay. Hello, I'm Sara from the Ecommerce Foundation. I'm the research coordinator here, and welcome to the Zooming In on Global E-commerce webinar. We are hosting the webinar because we just published the global report for this year. Very cool. We covered more countries than we ever have in the past. Which is why I probably look more tired than normal, maybe. So today we're actually going to be hearing from Mark de Bruijn. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. He is the head of marketing for the EMEA and MEE for SAP Customer Experience. Hopefully I got all that right. And hopefully we're trying still to get in touch with Lydia, Lydia Makau. She's the country manager for Safe.Shop. The internet connection was weird, so that's why we're a bit delayed, but hopefully she can join us maybe on the phone and we can also hear from her. But right now, you're stuck with just me and Mark. So let's just continue on and see what happens. Okay, cool. Mark, I'm gonna unmute you. Great. So, Mark, first question. Oh, by the way, for the audience, if you have any questions, you can put them in the little chat box, and my excellent side researcher here, Isabella, will hopefully answer them or get me to answer them in some way. She'll flag me down. So if you have one, just put it there. Okay, Mark, for you, I have some questions. Do you want to say hello?
Yeah, thanks, Sara. Yes, hi everyone. Yeah, I think you already mentioned it. I'm Mark de Bruijn, VP of Marketing for SAP Customer Experience in, well, let's say Europe, Middle East, and Africa, to simplify it. And I think most people might know SAP Customer Experience from our hybrid commerce solution. Yeah. So I think, Sara, we've been working together for quite some time now, and it has always been great. So I've been really looking forward to today's webcast. Yeah. So.
Cool. I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you. And yeah, we have worked together for a very long time now, so this will be really interesting because we've never had an opportunity to do this. So, okay, I'm just going to start with question numero uno here. Of course, I thought of these questions in advance, and I thought about how the differences between you and Lydia in your perspectives on global e-commerce would be interesting for our readers and our listeners and everybody really. Because, and I even wrote here, Lydia comes from a space, a region of emerging markets, emerging e-commerce markets really, and it feels a lot of times that you have a lot of experience with very developed e-commerce markets that they're very well established. So I'm curious to know how you see retailers from thoroughly established markets who are using all these technological tools possible, for example, AI, machine learning, Google Analytics, etc. How do they prepare themselves for a market that may otherwise be not so established? So for some of the African markets or Asian markets, for example.
Yeah, I think first of all, this is a very complex topic. It has everything to do with culture from my perspective. And even if you look within Europe, you already see many differences. I'm Dutch. If you want to do business in Belgium, which is just across the border, it already requires a completely different mindset. But yeah, I think about visuals, right? So you cannot always use the same visual in every single culture. So expanding globally is a huge transformation, and I believe that technology should always come second. So I think it's really about understanding the culture, the needs, and only then look at the right technology that is needed. It's not as simple as just expanding everything. And you mentioned African countries. I think some of them have a huge mobile focus, for example, and maybe require a mobile-only strategy. And my experience is if you want to do this well, you need a dedicated team to work on the expansion, who understands the local culture, who understands the needs. And then it requires also, I think, agile technology and an agile strategy so you can easily adapt also for future needs. And yeah, this is a topic that, of course, I speak a lot with many of our customers. And the difficult thing here is for especially global brands is that they have always started with a local focus, many of them, right? And then they grow and then they start expanding. And that, of course, then requires a completely different mindset and a completely setup within the company. So that is what makes it very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's something that I also noticed when we were creating the global report. What you said is so true. I was quite shocked, actually. I think, yeah, I wrote a blog post about this after the report because I was so shocked at, maybe it's because I'm American, but I live in the Netherlands. And so for me, I've always thought of everybody purchasing online via desktop or laptop. For me, that's what I would do. I don't think I would really ever purchase via mobile. And so when I saw the amount of people accessing the internet via mobile and also purchasing via mobile, I was quite surprised. And I thought, wow, I wonder if retailers in some of these more, developed e-commerce markets, I wonder if they realize this even, because if they're working with the same mindset that I'm working with, they might have no idea that they're missing a large portion of the population by not using mobile as well. Let's see. Okay, sorry. That doesn't lead me to a question, apparently. I just wanted to comment. Okay, so then, and culture is important, as you said. That was a really interesting point that I thought as well. But okay, so my next question then, what I will then lead to is, what can you tell the listeners today? So that would be, a lot of times we have small to medium-sized retailers and just generally non-big box, right? So I don't know if anybody from Amazon is listening. If you are, that's cool. But I think more about SMEs is our target audience. So what can you tell them about the more unique or interesting e-commerce markets? Which ones would you say are the most interesting, especially in the near future, and why? And what are the striking facts about them? And what would retailers need to know about entering those markets?
Yeah, well, from a growth perspective, I think it's interesting to look at markets like China, South Africa, Latin America, and a market like the Middle East. And I think you hear those regions or markets a lot. To me, every market has its uniqueness and interesting things. If you look at Japan, for example, you will see that consumers value their privacy a lot, and probably even more than the European countries, and even after GDPR. And so for the Japanese market, trust is extremely important. It is important everywhere, but it's extra important, I believe, in Japan. So you need to be careful with recommendations and the way that you use the consumer data. On the other hand, they also expect less in return. So a less individualized experience as well. And on the other hand, there's the Middle East market, where consumers demand almost the complete opposite. So they do want this individual approach with recommendations, with special offers, with fast delivery, and also really a fast response time when it comes to customer service. And they're also more open to share data in return for this individualized experience. And so those are two examples. But maybe even I also think that Europe is interesting, especially now with the cross-border e-commerce. Really the development of selling in multiple European countries, how delivery times are being improved, how these cultural differences even within Europe are being treated, and new innovations that we see in the region. So yeah, there are many interesting markets at the moment, and I think the development goes so fast that we will only continue to see many interesting developments.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. But so you mentioned specifically China, South Africa, and Latin America as a whole. Some of our colleagues just came back from China, actually, from a trip where they were, looking at the ways that different companies are, working in e-commerce, let's just say. And I was surprised to hear what they had to say about the Chinese consumer and how they're very happy to do everything on their mobile, basically, but also in what they want to buy. They want to buy a whole lot of stuff online, and some things that we otherwise might not buy necessarily in the Netherlands online. So do you feel, when it comes to China in particular, do you feel that the saying, as China goes, so goes the rest of the world? Do you feel like that's true? Because normally I think it's the US, but I think sometimes in e-commerce it might actually be China, that they're sort of way ahead of us in how they're doing e-commerce.
Yeah, well, they definitely have a completely different setup, I think. So, and different expectations. So I think in China, you almost have to deliver a same day delivery without, if you, and maybe in Europe, for example, you can get away with a 2-day delivery sometimes. I think in China, that's not, you will, I think people will definitely not accept it. I think it's completely different markets, and yeah, I think more and more this will be an example for the rest of the world. I have no idea. I'm not a China specialist here, but I do think that there are a lot of learnings from the Chinese market because it's also so different from, for example, what you mentioned, the U.S. market. So yeah, it's different, but with a lot of learnings, I think, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's it's true. Sometimes I think I'm going to be left behind because I don't know. But you mentioned the Middle East and how they are much more open. I think it was the Middle East. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but the Middle East being that they're more open to those consumers are more open to data collection, let's say, and the recommendations that might come from that to sharing that data. Something that I noticed, though, was really interesting because you brought up trust for Japan. I also noticed that Middle Eastern and North African consumers are also really hesitant sometimes when it comes to e-commerce, or their biggest concern, let's say, is trust, because those regions are some of the heaviest when it comes to cybercrime and I wonder what role that plays. It's interesting that the culture is very, yes, I'm happy to give you all my data so that you can recommend a product to me, but at the same time they're experiencing this, and so it's harder for them to trust in e-commerce markets. So if you were, this isn't on my question list, I'm sorry, but I'm curious if you were a retailer and you were going to go into the Middle East, or you wanted to expand there, or to North Africa, let's say, how would you tell them, or how would you give them advice on how to sort of, I don't know, use rhetoric to make sure that people know that they're doing what they can do to protect against cybercrime, or to protect against the personal information being shared and data protection and whatnot? Is there some way that retailers can fix that trust?
Well, I think people buy from brands that they trust. So that's maybe one of the basic things that every brand needs to understand. People buy from brands that they trust. So it's an extremely important topic. I think it's also a very broad topic because it includes many things. Like identity fraud is what you see. Of course, you see phishing, you see scams, right? And we live in a world where it unfortunately happens every single day. So, and I think you cannot always protect yourself from it, but you can be prepared. So as a company, I believe it starts with protecting data, having a clear structure and not like an endless number of systems trying to keep it up to date, but also educate your employees, explaining what can happen and how to prevent it. I think it's also about being open and transparent to consumers about how you're using data and how you're protecting data, maybe even educating them. And we see that a lot with banks, for example, where they educate their consumers with what a phishing email looks like, for example. And I think it's also about joining forces with your competition, your competitors, or joining an association to discuss this issue, act together in a certain market, for example. But also as a consumer, I think there are many things that you can do, and they might be quite obvious. But think about changing your passwords regularly, right? Which is not easy because I think I have 200 different passwords, so I always have to press the "I forgot my password" button. And software, right? So keeping software up to date is important, not only for a brand, for a company, but also for a consumer. Make sure that your software is up to date. And another obvious one is to not share your personal data, but this happens a lot, right? Especially, for example, on the phone, somebody calls you, be aware of what you share. And it might seem simple and obvious when I say it, but it happens a lot. And in the moment, you might share more than you want to share. And click with caution as well. So, be aware of where you click on. So it requires a different mindset, I think, as well.
I like that saying, though. That's a really good one. That's like one to stick, I think. Click with caution. It's funny because I asked you that question before I switched to my next page, which my next question was literally in line with all of this. So I'm going to run out of questions eventually, I think. No, probably not ever. But so it sounds like for consumers they have to click with caution, as you said. But I'm also curious for retailers if yeah, I guess my question is, if you're a retailer and you're a small retailer and you really have to think about these things though, because too often I think people just open up a web shop and they don't really think about it and they just put it there maybe, or they have one e-commerce manager and they think that's enough for everything that I do in cross-border e-commerce, but it just seems to not be. So strategically, I think that's probably not it. But when if a company is doing what it can do for cybercrime and to ensure that, as someone with a lot of customer experience and how the customer journey, at what point would you as a retailer want to let consumers know, maybe on your website, or at what point in the buying process would you want to let people know, hey, by the way, your data is safe, everything is good, I'm doing all these things to protect against cybercrime. Do you know what I mean? At what point in the journey for a customer is that important for them to see that, to feel like, okay, now I want to buy this? Because
Yeah, I've read in research, but I don't know which one, so it's always a little vague now. But I've read that it's important to do it right from the beginning, so that when it comes to trust online, during every single step of the customer journey, you need to show the trust and earn the trust of the customer and the consumer. So it already starts, by, for example, visiting the web shop, and then you already need to, in many different ways, show that that consumers can trust you as a brand. Up till every step of the way is till the payment, but even after the payment, right? So and in Europe, we see, of course, a little bit of standardization, and in more regions, of course, across the world with GDPR, right? And where part of this is a little bit more standardized. So yeah, we see that companies and brands find this more and more important, and which is good, because it's good for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think definitely it's good for everyone. But yeah, so I think it's a good lead into my next question, actually, because talking about the customer journey, it seems like this is something that's universal, though. I think trust is consistently the number one thing that I see in my research that is negatively impacting e-commerce, or that is the barrier, let's say the main barrier. There are some other things, of course. Logistics is a huge one as well, especially globally, but trust is a big one. And that's pretty common, it sounds like. So my next question is, you've made it a point, especially I think in a lot of the content that you've produced, that customer journeys are unique, but I think that extends even more to the global sphere. But I can imagine that there are some universal consumer journey aspects in e-commerce, and so it sounds kind of vague, right? I want to know if there's any universal truth in the consumer journey. So, for example, how at what point in the consumer journey is it the same for everybody around the globe, no matter what, no matter where you are? Is it? Yeah, does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah. So, well, I think that the individual approach, or how I would like to call it, hyper individualization, is something that is happening around the globe. So, and maybe in some countries faster than in others, but it's a wish of the consumer, right? So in today's world, consumers expect to be the center of the world. Everything is individualized if you think about it, right? Think about your social media, your Facebook timeline or your Twitter timeline. It's individualized for you. Or if you search on a platform like LinkedIn, right, the job recommendations, they are individualized for you. Think about Netflix, the movies, or the playlist in Spotify. Everything is individualized, and we will see that more and more and more. And it's not just about email that says "Dear Mark," but it's really about the really individualized approach. If we connect it to e-commerce, then what we will see more and more, and we see it, we see brands that are already doing it today, but what we will see more and more is really the individualized website. So content that adapts to the user and also adapts along the way while you explore the web shop, for example. We see it also with email content, that the content in the email is really specific for the consumer. We see it with campaigns by only targeting those consumers who are most likely to be interested. And I think we will see this development across multiple channels as well. So individualized ads on TV, online. We already have individual ads online, but it will be way more individualized in the future. And also think about the customer service. So if you then connect with the customer service, that they are extremely personal and they have all the data they need to support you. So I think it's all about delivering this great experience, but with the very, very important note that it should never be creepy.
That's so true. Yes, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, so hyper individualization, I think it definitely is a huge global opportunity that is going to happen everywhere. And again, maybe in some countries faster than in other countries, but it is something that we as consumers we are demanding this because our world is changing. So we are demanding this from all the brands.
Yeah, I think I'm really going to stick on the super creepy thing, because sometimes it can be really creepy if I'm looking for a gift for somebody and then all of a sudden I get these Google ads and they're saying, yeah, so what's next in life? What are you doing? Are you buying a house? And I'm like, well, wait a minute, no. It's it's an interesting world. So when you talk about the individualized, what you're talking about as well, I think in essence is big data and AI and machine learning and all these algorithms that give us what we need to be able to determine what to recommend to people and what they're looking at, what they're clicking on, i.e. click with caution. But I think it seems a bit daunting if I am an SME, a small retailer. I think that seems a bit daunting in the thought of how will I compete with these big box retailers or Amazon, let's say, who are able to do this with very with ease, and because they have a lot of money and they're able to afford these things. So my question to you is, how do SMEs compete with these big box retailers who can truly use a plethora? They can use AI and machine learning, and they can use virtual reality. They can use all these things to leverage and to gain more customers. How do small retailers compete with that, especially in the future as that just becomes more and more apparent?
Well, I think it will be available for everyone. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's there's such a huge development there, but with a lot of things, in the beginning it will be available for maybe a small group, but I think already today, it's kind of integrated in a lot of different solutions. And if I look at our SAP solutions with our Leonardo platform, everything is already integrated, and this is in high development. So I don't think it's true that, let's say, smaller brands cannot use artificial intelligence or machine learning. I think we will see this as a standard in all of our technology, and this development is going rapidly anyway. So I think this will be available to everyone. And I was speaking to a customer and I said, when I go to the supermarket, then, and this is maybe a bad example, I don't know, but when I go to the supermarket, I already lose the personal touch, right? But when I go to my bakery, right, then this person always knows who I am, what I need. So sometimes a smaller company it's easier to be personal than a larger company.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you said about the bakery. Yeah, I noticed sometimes that when I moved to Europe, I was quite shocked sometimes at the fact that there are still a lot of these small mom and pop places, I guess, because in the US they're kind of disappearing. That was a big conversation recently with Walmart acquiring many shares of, I think 77% of shares of Flipkart in India. And I remember thinking, oh, that's what happened in the US, that Walmart would come into a small town or whatever, and all of a sudden all these mom and pop places would be gone. And it seems that a lot of it has something to do with the fact that people are just, they much prefer to buy something for not a lot of money than to get that personal experience. But I do think that might be I think that might be reversing. What are your thoughts on that? I think about, sorry, I should clarify that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on people originally wanting to always shop online and cross-border for cheaper prices, but it seems like more they get better recommendations and maybe they want that individualized personal experience now.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it depends on the economy and the region that you're in, but in many regions right now the economy is improving a lot, and it's quite in a good phase. Not everywhere, but in many regions it is. And I think what you see then is that it's not only about price anymore, right? It's not about getting the cheapest, getting a product in the cheapest way as possible, but it's really about the product itself, the quality of the product. So if we think about bread as a very simple example, we might want to spend a little bit more on bread that we know is as a high quality, and we know more about the ingredients, where it's coming from. And this is a trend anyway around products, right? Maybe today, if we talk about food, we want to know when we want to know or talk about the details, we might be able to see from which country a product is. But in the future, we want to know not only from which country is it. We want to know which farm. We want to know the details of the farm, how it was produced, right? So this is a trend anyway, I think. So and that might be also connected to it. So we want to know more about the products that we use, and price is not the most important thing in many cases.
So keeping that in mind, I do think what you said is I think it's very true, and I also think it's very true for a lot of the Western countries. Let's just say that the concept of sustainability and the supply chain and knowing where things are coming from in the supply chain, that's becoming more and more of I don't know, a thing. I don't know what you want to call it, a phenomenon that people want to hear about and see. And I wonder, with all of your experience as a customer experience and customer journey expert, let's say, do you think that that's goodness, how do I say this? I think companies should maybe start putting more effort into letting people know exactly what farm they did get it from, and actually investing resources into figuring all of that information out and then giving that information to the customer. I know we have Tony's here in the Netherlands, the chocolate. They try to do something similar, and Lush does something similar with all their cosmetic products. And so it is becoming a thing, but do you think it's something that companies, retailers should start investing in, actually, is ensuring that customers know about the supply chain and what's happening throughout it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more you can share about your product, how it's produced, the higher the chances are that people are going to buy it. And this might also come back to the topic of trust, right? So the more you share about your product, how it's produced in a sustainable way, and maybe even involving consumers in creating a product. That's also something that we see more and more, and not only asking for feedback or involving them at the end, but really from the beginning. That is more and more important, and this is where a lot of brands are actually very successful.
Do you think it's as this is the global webinar, do you think it's a regional thing, or do you think that's actually across the world? Because I'm curious to know, I know that China consumers are very much interested in brands and making sure it's the correct brand and not a fake brand. But do you find that it's like that in all parts of the world, that they are all concerned about the sustainability or the supply chain or ethics or et cetera? Or do you find that it's just certain regions or areas?
No, I think it's everywhere, actually. Yeah, I really think there are of course always exceptions, but looking at this from a global level, I definitely think this is happening everywhere. And the more people know about a product, the better it is and the more trust that they have in the product.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a great trend that we're taking on then. And I think e-commerce is a good way to do it then, because it's so much easier to show people. If you go to a shop, you might, I mean, as a shop worker, you might not always know exactly which farm the whatever came from. But it's much nicer to see the full supply chain journey, the product journey, I guess, for the consumer. So
Yeah.
actually, yeah, so that said, I keep asking you what country or region, but I'm curious to know the differences really between them. Is there a country or a region anywhere in the world where the concept of omni-channel is either outdated and or impossible? And where and why?
That is a very good question. We've been using the term omni-channel for a long time now, and I've heard also many different terms, right? So, and maybe the most beautiful one is no channel instead of omni-channel. And I really believe this is relevant for every single market today. There are markets that have maybe less channels, and think about the African market, maybe, there are in most cases less channels, or maybe even only one channel for a lot of companies, and think about the mobile channel then. The most important thing to me is that you need to be agile as a brand. So you need to be ready for the future, and it's maybe not only about today, right? It's about having a culture, having a structure that is agile enough so that you can adapt to the opportunities of the future. So maybe today you might sell only through one channel, but what about tomorrow? And how easy is it to make the change? So as we see this of course a lot, and it's an extremely interesting development. So I believe this is relevant in every single region.
So ensuring that any retailer, no matter how big or small, they just need to be ready to adapt to whatever happens in the market, it seems.
Exactly. And you see this with a lot of brands, right? So it's not only about today, it's really also about the future, and how easy is it to adapt to the future. So, and that is a very, I know that a lot of brands are thinking about that and having that on their agendas.
Mm-hmm. I really, with the global report this year, I really wanted to make it more clear to retailers that places like Africa and Latin America and Asian countries as well, and the Middle East, that there are a lot of really great opportunities there for investment. And I think sometimes it's hard to inspire retailers or to say, yeah, I know that it's not maybe your first thought, but it actually is a really great place to consider. And so I'm wondering if you can maybe, give some sort of inspirational message about some of these lesser known e-commerce markets. Maybe, I don't know if you have a favorite one somewhere or any particular reason why. And maybe something inspirational to help get retailers to even consider these markets, because I think that they're valuable and they are emerging. So from a consumer perspective, I don't know, but if there's anything you can say on that, I would be delighted to hear it.
Well, the inspiration should maybe be the enormous growth, right? So let's take, look at the Middle East, but I can easily say Africa, and I can also easily say, for example, Latin America, right? Or China. So the growth here is so immense. And if you're going to wait till they're like mature markets, then you're already too late. So you need to start now, as soon as possible, of course, with building your brand. That's truly important, but also understanding what I said earlier. So understanding the cultural needs and the differences, and that is, if you're going to wait, then you're definitely going to be too late. So that would be, I think that's the most important thing. Next to that is, of course, if you have the ability to expand, then these are of course also, it's so interesting to see also these differences, and to visit, to go there. And I think everyone is of course traveling, but to go there, let's say to Dubai, and see how people are doing business there. All of those things are also super, super interesting. Yeah, and the opportunity is immense. So what I would say to any retailer who is thinking about it, just at least visit and then and be inspired by the people as well there.
Yeah, visit and be inspired. I like that. Okay, so I just have maybe one last question. I'm sad that Lydia didn't get to join us, although I think that the information that you've given is really super great. So it's all okay. But one other question then. You brought up culture a few times, and I also have looked into culture in e-commerce and understanding how people are accepting, in what markets they're accepting, et cetera, in what product categories even. And so my question is, what do you know off the top of your head maybe, or in your experience, in all of your experience as being someone involved in customer experience, what would you say is the two places that are total opposites when it comes to what they expect from their customer journey or their customer experience? So we've talked about what the universals are, but where are the two places that you can think of that are just completely opposite of each other? And it's quite interesting actually, because they are so opposite, and perhaps due in large part because of culture. I know that's a tough one off the top of your head, but maybe you can think of that.
The one country or market that is, I think I would advise everyone to look at it in detail is Japan, because Japan is really completely different from all the other markets from my perspective. And I already gave the example of trust and how to handle customer data, but it's in many ways just a really different type of market, and also a different experience that people expect, right? So maybe today, and not even that individualized, and prices, for example, in store and online can be different, and people accept it because their privacy is much more important than having this omni-channel approach. So I would advise everyone to look at the Japanese market and see what's happening there, how are things going on there. And I don't want to make it sound as if they're behind, because they're not. They're just doing it in a different way, and that is super interesting to me. And I keep also mentioning the MENA markets, right? So the Middle East, North Africa market. I think that's because of the huge development, that is definitely a region to look at. And the same counts for Latin America, where people are also a little bit more open to share data and also expect this really individualized experience. And then when you look at the US market and also the European market, it's also very interesting because of the maturity of the market, new developments, new innovations that you see. You mentioned Amazon, for example, but there are so many larger companies that are trying things, and they have teams that are always working on innovation and development, and it's just really, really interesting also to see what is coming out of those teams and those larger companies. So those are for me definitely the interesting things.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like you really you can have a global perspective of e-commerce, but you really, really need to look into the region that you're considering, and you really need to look at that specific country even, because even going from the Netherlands to Germany can be different, but definitely going from the Netherlands, let's say, to Japan, then would be very different. So you really need to understand your consumer and what they expect and what their preferences are and what their behaviors are if you're going to succeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's pretty, I try to cover that a lot of times in our reports as well, because I think it's the one puzzle piece that I think a lot of retailers, they might be not forgetting, but it's almost as if, okay, I've set up my web shop and I've done everything correctly and all my products are here. Why is nobody buying from it? And I think that a lot of times can be the answer, is that you haven't quite understood your target audience yet enough to know what they want, what they're doing. Well, okay, I'm just going to end it with one other very short question, maybe for the people who are listening. Can you give us at least one, but maximum of 3 tips? What would be your 3 top tips, let's say maybe for retailers who are looking to expand globally, particularly regarding the customer experience, if you'd like, or just in general, with all of your experience in e-commerce, what could you tell a retailer who is looking to expand more? What could you tell them for how to do it in the smart way and in the most affordable way and all that? What would you say?
Well, I think most important thing is to understand the market. So just visit the country, for example, that you wanna sell in. Talk to potential customers. Talk to competition. That's maybe one thing that you can definitely do. I think the second thing is make sure that your company is agile enough to do so, right? So from not only a technical perspective, but really as a team setup. So make sure that you have the right investments there and the right processes and strategy. And lastly, I would say it's also about creating, and then we come back to culture again, but creating this culture where it's also okay to test and to fail, and to start over again, right? So more of this almost innovative or startup culture for a new market, so that you can try things out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, you stop it, you try something new. Really that open approach, I think, is important.
Cool. Well, that's really all I had. I think I always have more questions that I could ask, but I think we are at our time limit. And again, I'm really sorry to anybody who also, well, of course, everybody wanted to hear from Lydia, but I'm really sorry that we were not able to. Might be a thing where we have her on the next webinar. Let's see what we can do. But anyway, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I don't know if you want to have some final remarks, or I'm not sure if SAP is doing something new and innovative yet. I don't know if you want to say anything before we sign off here.
Thanks for having me. Super interesting. I'm also, I would love to connect with Lydia later. If somebody wants to connect with me, then please do so. If you have questions later on. As SAP, we have lots of developments when it comes to solutions for the customer experience. So if you're interested, then just let me know.
Cool. Yeah, and if anybody does have any questions for me or for Mark or for Lydia, you can always send us an email. If you haven't yet, you should really check out the global report. It's on the e-commerce wiki. There's a free version of it, which is really cool. We cover some really interesting markets in there, like Qatar and Tunisia and Nigeria, and loads of interesting markets that we sort of talked about today, maybe a bit. But yeah, I think that's it from my side. Thank you from the E-commerce Foundation, and thank you again to Mark. And I'm always going to mess up signing off on this thing because I'm terrible at technology, but I hope everybody has a great day. Bye-bye.